Today, I'm going to show you how to compound basic vector shapes into new ones. And for that, we are going to use this worksheet. You can find a link to download this document in the description section below. As usual, I have included timestamps of the topics in the description section below. Clicking on a chapter timestamp takes you to that part of the video. If you are new here, find a guide to use this worksheet from the previous videos. Now let's begin to create compositions. So let us begin by duplicating these building blocks from the paste area and moving them to sit on the dotted guides of our worksheet to create new compositions. First, I need the circle. I'm going to press S to activate the selection tool, and then I'm going to select the circle. Next, I'll press Ctrl Z to duplicate the shape and drag it over and place it over the dotted guide and change its fill color to orange. Next, I need the hexagon. I'm going to duplicate and drag it over and place it on the composition to overlap with the circle, like so. Then I'll change its fill color to green. Next, I need a diamond. I'm going to duplicate and drag it over and place it on the composition and change its fill color to blue. Lastly, I need the triangle. I'm going to duplicate and drag it over and place it on the composition and change its fill color to red. Now, in Inkscape, we can create multiple vectors on one layer. And when we do this, a kind of nested layer is created within the layer we are currently using. Therefore, objects drawn first are at the bottom, those drawn next are on top of them, and those drawn last are at the top. In Inkscape, this is called Z order or Z order. Objects with high Z order are those that were drawn last, and therefore sit on top of objects with lower Z order. We can already see that some objects sit on top of others. If we want to really see that some objects are below, the easiest way is to change the transparency of the upper object. To change the transparency of the hexagon, for instance, I'll select it, go to Object, Fill and Stroke, to call up the Fill and Stroke dialog, and reduce the opacity of the circle to 90%. So you see now that the circle is sitting under it. You can control the relative position of objects within a layer. Let us see how to do it with the bottom vector. I want you to click on this bottom vector and come up here to the Tools control bar and select Raise Selection to Top. And now the vector is on top. While here we notice we can also raise the selection one step, lower the selection one step, or lower it to the bottom. So we can select this diamond here and send it to the top or back or to the bottom like so. Now this composition we have just made are ungrouped vectors. With ungrouped vectors, you can select each vector shape individually as there is no present connection between them. We can also make changes to them individually. However, if we want to make changes to all the objects, we first need to select them. To make a selection, I click and drag over all the objects using the selection tool. And now you see they are all selected. And we can now see a bounding box around each of the shapes within the selection. Now that they are all selected, we can make changes to the colors and effects of all objects in one go. For example, I can change the color of the fill by choosing a color from the color palette. Or I can change the color of the stroke by pressing on Shift and selecting a color from the color palette. I can also grab the selection and move it around or rotate it or skew it. I'll use Ctrl Z to undo and then click on the canvas to deselect the shapes. Dragging the mouse over all objects to select is a default behavior of the selection tool. Now, you must not always drag over all objects to select. If you look at the Tools control bar, you can see this button reading Toggle Selection Box to select all touched objects. Pressing on this button, we can have the possibility to select every object that is either within the box or that touches its boundaries. Using this method to select may speed up your workflow in certain circumstances. Now, in some instances, you do wish to select only one of the shapes. To select multiple shapes within a group, I press on the Shift key and click on one shape after the other. And I can now also make changes to them. I'll click on the canvas to deselect the shapes. Another way will be to press down on the Alt key while dragging the selection tool over the objects I wish to select, like so. I'll click on the canvas to deselect. Now I am going to click and drag over all the shapes to select all individual shapes. I am going to press Ctrl D to duplicate and click and drag over the duplicate to the right while pressing down the Ctrl key. Now, with all the individual shapes still selected, I'm going to come up here to Object and select Group. Or I could press Ctrl G. I'm going to click on an empty spot of the canvas to deselect. Now, a group is treated as a single object. And what this means is that you can manipulate all objects within a group as if it were one single object. And this is true for most operations. Now the shapes on the left and those on the right look similar. And this begs the question, why may we want to create a group after all? Now, when creating complex compositions, we may use several primitive objects like squares, circles, and triangles. If they are single and independent, as on the left, we would need to affect each object individually when carrying out operations. However, when the shapes are grouped, as on the right, we can select them all at once, move them as one, and carry out operations like changing the fill color, stroke color, and much more, all in one go. If I want to release a group so that I treat the objects in them as individual elements, I can come up here to Object and select Ungroup, or press Shift-Ctrl G. The objects will now be individual shapes as on the left. However, I want to group the objects on the right, so I'll select them all and press again on Ctrl G to group. Now you do not have to ungroup each time you want to edit an object within a group. You can still edit individual objects within a group. If I press on Ctrl and click on an object within a group, it will be selected. I can now change its fill color, manipulate it, or even move it around within the group. I am going to press Ctrl, click on the object and bring it back to its initial position. Another way is to double-click to enter a group. This allows you to also enter a group and edit individual objects. I'll double-click on the group to enter it and access the objects. And I can now edit any object or shape within the group, like so. To leave the group, I am going to double-click on an empty canvas area with the selection tool. And if you have been doing this along, congratulations. Okay, we have just seen how to create and manage a group of vector shapes. Next, I'm gonna click on the circle, press Ctrl Z, and drag the duplicate and place it here into position under the title Union. And I'm going to change its fill color to orange. Next, I'll duplicate the square and drag it into place to overlap with the circle and change its fill color to green. Now I want you to select this new composition and press Ctrl D to duplicate. Drag it to sit under the next title difference. And now I'm going to select more than one object composition and repeat the process to fill the remaining titles on this row. When done, I'm going to select all of this row, press Ctrl D to duplicate, and drag the duplicates and place them here into position like so, under the next row of titles below. Now we notice that the squares are above the circles. I'm going to press on Shift on my keyboard and click on the squares one by one to select them all. Now let me just click on the canvas to deselect. Actually, we saw before that a quicker way is to hold down on the Alt key while dragging the selection tool over the square objects like so. So once selected, I'll come up here to the Tools control bar and select Lower Selection to the bottom. So as it currently stands, we have two rows of overlapping vector shapes, squares and circles. On the first row, the squares are on top of the circles, and on the second row, the squares are under the circles. Now we are going to use path effects on the shapes to create a single vector shape. To do this, we are going to use the Path menu. So I am going to select the first pair of objects under Union, and I'm going to come over to the Path menu and select Union. Upon click, you can see that both shapes have become one. I'll click on the canvas to deselect and select the pair below where the square is above the circle and repeat the process by going to Path, Union. Now, if you looked carefully, you can also notice that the result is different based on which object is below and which is above. Each of these path operations automatically converts an existing object or stroke into a path. And so if I select the shape and press N on my keyboard to access the Edit Path by Nodes tool, we can now see the nodes and outline that make the new shapes. I'll press on S to call the selection tool. We can now select this compound shape and manipulate it as a single object. Now, this method of compounding shapes and most of the path effects we'll treat here are destructive to the initial individual shapes. And what this means is that once you apply the path effects on a group of objects, you no longer have access to the previous shapes. So I'm going to select the next pair of objects under Difference, and I'm going to come over to the Path menu and select Difference. I'll click on the canvas to deselect and select the pair below and repeat the process by going to Path, Difference. Now, this operation takes the object that is on top and uses it to remove the overlapping area from the object below. I am going to select the next pair of objects under Intersection, and I'm going to come over to the Path menu and select Intersection. I'll click on the canvas to deselect and select the pair below and repeat the process by going to Path, Intersection. This operation takes the overlapping area from both objects and creates a new object out of that. I am going to select the next pair of objects under Exclusion, and with the group selected, I'm going to come over to Path, Exclusion. I'm going to repeat the process for the next pair below. And what exclusion does is that it deletes or removes the overlapping area from both objects and creates a new object missing that intersection. So exclusion works in an opposite way to intersection. Again, we see the result is based on which object was below and which was above. I'm going to select the next pair of objects under Division, and I'm going to come over to the Path menu and select Path, Division. I'll repeat the process for the pair below. Division uses the outline of the object on top to cut through the object below where they are intersecting. I am going to select the next pair of objects under the title Cut Path and come over to the Path menu and select Cut Path. I'll repeat the process for the next pair below, and we see that the path below is cut by the path above where both intersect, and new paths are created as a result. The new paths no longer have any fill. Combine works in a similar way like union. Now let us copy the building blocks of this shape here, paste them on it, and bring them to sit in place. Let us now select both objects and go to Path, Combine. And on the surface, the results seem to be the same like what we had when we used Path, Union. However, there is a difference between the two. So if we press N to activate the Edit Paths by Nodes tool and click on the group we used Union on, you'll notice that there is no more information in here on what the initial basic components were. Union combines the objects in a destructive way. And we use union if we are interested in the final outcome only. If we click on the object we obtained by combining, we'd notice that Inkscape preserved some of the information of the component parts. So I can access the top left node of the square in here, and we noticed that the components here were once a square and a circle. Break apart works on unified or combined objects. For instance, I'll duplicate and pull the building blocks of the next set of objects and place them in place, starting with the star, the circle, and the square. And let us click on each of these objects to see they are separate. Next, I want you to select them and go to Path Union. Now you cannot select the individual parts to apply a function on them. It is now a single object. I'm going to select this unified object and duplicate and bring the duplicate over here. And then select the object and go to Path, Break Apart. Now the objects have been broken into different objects except those that were touching or overlapping. We can now select the parts individually and apply different functions on them. Now for the next set of operations, I want you to select all the circles and change the fill color to blue and the stroke to 0.1. Next, select the first 3 circles and press on Ctrl D to duplicate and change the fill color of the duplicates to orange. Now, as it stands, we have the orange colors on top of the blue ones. Select the first orange circle and come up to Path, Inset. This operation basically just shrunk the orange image all the way around the periphery. And with the next one, Path Outset makes the circle larger. So it is basically a reverse of the previous one. And for us to see that this orange circle has been made larger, let us select it and send it to the back. And if we select the next one and go to Path, Dynamic Offset, it gives you more flexibility by presenting a handle on top of here. You can use this handle to scale the circle up or down. And if we select the next one and go to Path, Linked Offset, this behaves the same like Dynamic Offset, except that it creates a new copy under the object and links it with the original. Press on the spacebar to select the new copy, and then pull it aside and give it a pale yellow color to make it look different. Now, because the two shapes are linked, anything I do to the original will be transposed onto this copy. For example, with the original copy selected, we can alter its size or skew it, or we can create another path effect on it. And we can see how these effects are applied to the new copy. Now, that was an overview of some path effects and how we can use path effects on primitive or other shapes to create even more complex shapes. In later tutorials, we'll see more of path effects like simplify that could be used to reduce the number of nodes in complex objects, or reverse that will come in handy when we position and direct text around a path. And path effects is a topic we'll cover in its own light. In the next video, we are going to learn how to draw in Inkscape and learn how to effectively use the Bezier or pen tool. See you in the next video.